Okay, so hi once again, and welcome to the course. It's great that you are here today, and we are going to start now. So today our lecture is going to be called Introduction, Typology Through the Decades. And as you all know, it's a part of the course organized jointly by REMODUS and University of Helsinki called Typological and Sociolinguistic Approaches to Language Variation. My name is Ksenia Shagal. I'm a professor of Finno-Ugristik studies at LMU Munich. And I'm going to coordinate this course. And even though I'm not going to teach all the lectures, I'm not going to give all the lectures, but I'm going to be with you throughout the course. So already before the course, so during your registration, I asked you how much you know about linguistic typology and sociolinguistics, but there is possibly one other word in the name of the course that might not be familiar, namely REMODUS. So just a couple of words about REMODUS and what this is, since this is the main organizer of this course. So this is a project which is currently ongoing. REMODUS stands for the remaking of a discipline, digital transformation and internationalization in and beyond Uralic studies. It unites 10 European universities which deal with Finno-Ugric or Uralic languages, and it is the current iteration of a more general internationalization initiative in Finno-Ugric studies that dates back to 2013 when we had our first winter school. So this initiative, this project organizes various kinds of online teaching and also seasonal schools. There might be another school coming soon in 2025, but we are not yet certain about the details. So you can stay updated if you follow the REMODUS updates on the web. Okay, so some general information about the course. So our time frame is the following. We are going to have this course for 3 weeks from today up until the 4th of October. And the contact sessions are going to be 3 times a week. So on Monday, on Wednesday, and on Friday, mostly in the evening. So from 6 to 7:30 Central European Summer Time. So that's Berlin, Munich, Rome, Paris, for instance. So make sure that you are here in the right time slot. Our meetings are going to be in Zoom, as those of you who are already here apparently know. The course materials are going to be available on this website, and I have actually sent the link to all the participants already. Some of the materials are going to be behind the password, so there will be a special page for that. And here is the password, but you don't need to take it down right now. I will also send it to all the participants, all the registered participants, so you will get it tonight. A very important piece of information. There is a mailing list. I sent this information in my first message already, but not everyone subscribed. So I'm going to repeat it once again. There is a mailing list, and most of the communication during the course is going to be through this mailing list. So all the announcements, all the possible changes, everything is going to be, of course, it's going to be on the web page also, but it's going to be communicated via email. So please subscribe. As I said, this information, so how to subscribe, is already available in the message that you received earlier. But basically what you need to do, you just need to send a message to this email address that you can see on the screen right now. The email has to be just subscribe REMODUS SocTyp. So basically exactly the words that you can see right in front of you. And then you will be subscribed, you will receive a confirmation, and you will get all the updates and all the necessary information throughout the course. So please do that. Don't forget to do this. This is very important for the course. Then, as you know, we have two kinds of participants. We have passive participants who basically can follow the course on their own schedule. You will get the access to all course materials anyway, so videos, reading, tasks, anything. You're not going to have any obligatory tasks, and you are not going to get any ECTS points, so you are just doing this because you want to. Well, the active participants obviously want to do that as well, but they also get ECTS points for that. And there are going to be some very small obligatory assignments after every session. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. There will be one obligatory reading assignment and some group work based on the assignment. Again, something that I will explain later. And each group of 3 to 5 people is going to prepare a presentation for the very last slot of our course, so for the 4th of October. So as you can see, if you want to get credits for this course, this is a fairly intensive work, so please be prepared for that. We had some last-minute cancellations of the active participants. So basically, if you applied as a passive participant, but you still want to get ECTS points and you still want to participate in the course more actively, please send me a message basically after the session today or tomorrow, and we will do our best to accommodate those who still want to become more active in the course. So as for the assignments and contact sessions, how they're going to be. So after every contact session, I will ask you to submit 3 very short take-home messages from the session that you personally find most important. That can be anything. That does not have to be the most important, officially the most important take-home message from the lecture, but maybe something that was very interesting to you and something that you find most helpful. So you will have a special form for that. I will explain this later. The deadline for this is 24 hours after the end of the session. So we are doing that after every session, so that we are always up to date. So that's basically 7:30 the next day. And this is something that is obligatory for active participants, but actually all the passive participants are also encouraged to submit your take-home messages. Then after you have submitted them, I will take a look at them and sort them. I assume that some of them might be the same. And right before each contact session, we are going to take a look at your take-home messages together. I will select several, and we will all together vote for those that you find most relevant. So this way we will see what the most important information you get from the course is. And for that, I encourage you to come a little bit early. So maybe the voting itself is going to be maybe 5 minutes before the actual start of the lecture, but please come a little bit earlier. So I will open Zoom sessions earlier every time so that we can maybe still discuss something that we have left from the previous session. Okay, so yeah, that's the timing of the contact sessions from 4 to 6. Again, this is all Central European summertime. We're going to have some informal chat, or maybe if you have any practical questions, please feel free to come. I will be there. And also the voting for the take-home messages. Then an hour and a half from 6 to 7:30, we have our lecture with the last 5 to 15 minutes reserved for discussion, depending on the lecture. And then afterwards, we still might have some 15 minutes left for an informal chat or practical questions. The general rules are please keep your microphone off because we are quite a big group. And then on the other hand, feel free to have your camera on. This is not something that I insist on, but it would be nice to see some of your faces every once in a while. Then please use chat for questions during the lecture. And if you have any urgent questions or during the discussion, when you're encouraged to say something, please raise your virtual hand. I will not always see actual hands, even if your cameras are on, but those virtual Zoom hands that you can find in reactions, this is something that you can use. Okay, this is the time when we can actually practice that. Are there any questions so far that you would like to ask? Okay, good. So that's the roadmap of the course. Basically, since we are dealing with linguistic typology, then the main thing that is our starting point is that the world is linguistically very diverse. And then we are going to take a look at various ways how one can approach this. So we're going to talk a little bit about linguistic typology as a field in general, and well, what linguistic typology does and what questions it asks. And then we will proceed to explaining this diversity and, well, the diversity in general and some specific patterns of linguistic diversity. And as you will know, as you probably know already, there are different ways of explaining linguistic diversity and explaining various typological patterns. We are going to discuss some of them very briefly, but we will focus on sociolinguistics. Mostly. And then we will proceed to discussing, well, more or less one specific project that was actually the inspiration for this course. This is a project which is called GramAdapt, or linguistic adaptation, that was led by Kaiju Sinimäki at the University of Helsinki. And the idea of this project, founded by the European Research Council, was specifically to combine typological and sociolinguistic approaches to language variation. And we are going to discuss all the ideas that were behind this project, and then methods that were used in this project, and some of the outcomes. And finally, we are going to proceed to some case studies. And since you already know what REMODUS is and that we are dealing mostly with Uralic languages, then our case studies are going to come from broadly Uralic languages, but actually they are very good examples, so you don't need to know anything about Uralic languages in advance, and you'll be just able to enjoy some really, really nice case studies of that. So that's just a very general roadmap, and here are the lectures. So as I said, there are going to be 9 contact sessions. So today we have myself here, and the lecture is the introduction of linguistic typology through the decades. Then on Wednesday, it's me again, and we're going to talk about explanations in linguistic typology. Then for Friday, we have a lecture by Anne-Marie Verkerk scheduled. So basically, I don't have a title yet, but it's going to be moving in the direction of sociolinguistic factors and sociohistorical factors as explanatory factors for linguistic variation. And that's this week. Then next week, we're going to start with the GramAdapt project. So on Monday, we're going to have Kaiju Sinimäki, so the researcher in charge of the GramAdapt project, and his lecture is going to be called A Model for Integrating Typological and Sociolinguistic Aspects of Language Context. So basically, he will introduce the project and the main ideas of it. Then on Wednesday, we're going to have a lecture by Erika Shima, who is going to look more into the methodology there. And her lecture is entitled Comparing Context by a Sociolinguistic Typological Approach. So basically, she's going to introduce the questionnaire that was used in the GramAdapt project and generally various methodological issues that might arise when we discuss sociolinguistic context of language contact and how this influences variation in different languages. Please note that this lecture is going to be recorded, as you can see by Ari's affiliation here. She is now in Canberra, so it was very hard to find the time when it would work for all of us. So I will be here and we will just listen to the recording together. We will have some discussion rounds till towards the end. But basically, if you cannot be there for this session, then you can just listen to the lecture on your own. The recording will be available on the website. Okay, then on Friday next week, we're going to have a lecture by Panayotis Kapelis. So he's going to talk about his results. This is actually his master's thesis that he defended recently. The title of the talk is going to be Getting Sociolinguistic Information from Context-Induced Grammatical Changes. So he's looking he's looking at context situations from a different perspective. So basically, if we know what happened in languages, then can we get some information on what kind of sociolinguistic contexts were there for the language context scenario. And then finally, our last week, where I promised some case studies. On Monday, we are going to have a lecture by Richard Kabalik from the University of Tromsø. And his talk is going to be about Salt Sami. So basically, that is applying the methodology from the GramAdapt project, in which he was one of the contributors, to one specific language and one specific context situation. So his lecture is called The Case of Salt Sami, Shaped by Context, Defined by Differences. And our last lecture on the 2nd of October, on Wednesday, is by Alesi Hanina from the University of Helsinki. It's called Language Spreads in the Arctic, a Typological View. So this is again sociolinguistic approach to language contact and language variation in one specific region. So this is taking it a little bit broader than just one language and one context scenario, and seeing what we can do within one geographic area. And then that's all with the lectures. But on the 4th of October, the floor will be yours. So as I said already, we are going to have 6 talks by the course participants, since it's 1 hour and a half in total. So basically it's 10 to 12 minutes each. But the important thing is that each group will be responsible for the talk. A group of 3 to 5 people. We will distribute the reading assignments a little bit later, so we are not going to talk about this today, but you will get more information about this. So each group chooses a paper to read and should meet to discuss the paper, or otherwise find a way to discuss the paper and prepare a joint presentation. There can be any number of presenters, so you don't have to each say something, but basically you can just choose one person. But nevertheless, it's your assignment as a small group. So this is only relevant to the active participants and those who would like to join us as active participants. Okay, so that's the plan. 9 sessions, and now you know about all of them. And basically, now I think we can have a very quick introduction round. Of course, as I said, we are a fairly large group, so we will not be able to do a proper introduction round where you can say a couple of words about yourselves. But I created a couple of polls. So I will ask you to answer in Zoom. There will be several questions. They will appear on the screen. Yeah, so now I'm launching it, and I'll give you maybe a minute or so to answer the questions, and we will take a look at the results just to see who is basically with us today or tonight. Yes, so hopefully now you should see the poll on the screen, and you can just select the answers that apply to you. Okay, great. Now I have received all of the answers, so I can end the poll and I can share the results with you. So hopefully you are able to see them on the screen right now. So, okay, most of people are joining us from Europe tonight, so I guess that means that's evening where you're joining us from, but we also have people from Asia, from North America, and from South America. So that's a fairly nice geographical coverage. Okay, then is your mother tongue or one of them Indo-European? Okay, well, we have a very nice distribution. So quite a lot of people with the Indo-European languages as their mother tongues, but then a little less than a half with non-Indo-European speakers. That's nice. Okay, then what's your current level of studies? Again, I think we have a very nice distribution. So the majority, well, no, the largest group are BA students. Then we have master students, some doctoral students, a couple of postdocs, and then people who do not belong to any of those groups. Okay, well, that's great. I hope that everyone will be able to learn something here despite the differences in your current level. Okay, would you say you are more familiar with typology or sociolinguistics? So where people are mostly coming from, so what your background is. Okay, and it's, well, I guess it's almost equal. So yes, lots of people interested in typology and also in sociolinguistics, but also both equally or neither so far. Let's see if we can change that. And then we have some active participants here, some passive participants. Probably not everyone is here for the introductory lecture, so maybe we'll have more people joining us later on during the course. Okay, so thanks for participating. And I guess we can now proceed to the topic of our today's lecture. And that's, as I promised you, linguistic typology. So, well, since many of you are to some extent familiar with linguistic typology, you probably know that linguistic typology it can be defined as the systematic study and comparison of language structures. This is a definition from a very nice introductory handbook by Viveka Velopillai. So basically what we do when we are doing linguistic typology, we are comparing the structures of a wide range of diverse languages. And why are we doing this? We are doing this to understand language, to know more about language as a fundamental defining feature of a human being. So we know that language is one of the things that makes us humans. That's our unique ability. So if we know as much as possible about different languages in the world, then we can know more about human language as such, as a phenomenon. So basically, the most important question that we ask in general, or the first question that we ask within linguistic typology, is how similar and how different can languages be? And well, of course, there are lots of languages in the world. So this is a map from Glottolog. We are going to talk a little bit more about Glottolog later, but here different colors stand for different language families. So we can see that in some places we have larger language families, in some we have smaller, but generally the linguistic diversity on Earth is quite impressive. And well, generally, of course, it's interesting to see if we are interested in the question of where and how language typology began. It's important to think of how early people became aware of linguistic diversity in general and how that developed during the centuries. And actually, well, obviously, people were aware of linguistic diversity for a very long time because the history of, well, the story of the Tower of Babel is very long. So obviously the understanding of the fact that people do not all speak the same language and that some diversity in this domain exists, that was already present quite a long time ago. But well, systematic approaches to that actually only appeared much, much later. Well, for instance, some ideas that might be seen as building towards linguistic typology can be found already in the Middle Ages. So, for instance, Dante Alighieri discussed language differentiation and linguistic diversity, and he saw that as a natural fact. So this is not just a consequence of a Babel scene, but this is something which is natural. And he did some language comparison, but obviously he was mostly comparing European languages, so the ones that were around. But at least, well, obviously the intellectuals at that time were already aware of the fact that there is some linguistic diversity. Then during the Renaissance times, there was also some cross-linguistic comparison by different scholars, but basically the most important idea there was that they just wanted to trace languages back to an original superior language, and the comparison of languages, well, its sole purpose was actually to see what was there in the very beginning, this ideal perfect language. So this is more similar to historical comparative method rather than linguistic typology in the modern sense. Then later on, the approaches and the interests of intellectuals changed. So, for instance, if we take a look at what Leibniz thought about linguistic diversity, he observed some differences across languages, and he wanted to reconcile it with the fact that actually human mind is essentially homogeneous. So we should presuppose essential basic homogeneity of all the languages if they need to express the human mind. So there is some kind of controversy that needs to be resolved. But again, already then there was this idea that those differences in languages are not something bad and not the consequence of the Babel scene, but actually this is something that is just a result of different peoples being different, and it's in the human nature, and different cultural evolutions led to differences in languages, which is actually very much in line with what we are going to discuss throughout this course. And some similar ideas were actually later expressed by Wilhelm von Humboldt. Then, of course, those people that I mentioned earlier, they were mostly interested in European languages because this is what they just had around them and what they had access to. But one very important source of understanding of linguistic diversity in the world was the need to communicate with people speaking other languages, and this is what is known as missionary linguistics. So basically, people translating the Bible and spreading Christianity they needed to know all those languages of all those peoples that they wanted to communicate to. And some earliest descriptions, grammatical and lexical descriptions of various languages spoken outside of Europe, they are the result of the activities of those missionary linguists. Importantly, basically, some of these languages, they disappeared after the European invasion. So some of those descriptions are the only descriptions that are still available to us, well, for some languages at least. So one important person here in this story is the Spanish Jesuit Lorenzo Gervasio Panduro, who created a catalog of the languages of the populations we know, so basically in South America. And he also created several descriptive grammars. Actually, some time ago, I was involved in data collection for one large typological project, and I needed to collect the data about the language called Lula, spoken in Argentina, and I found a grammar. Well, I discovered that it was written in Italian, but I thought, okay, well, even though if I'm not fluent in Italian, I can probably read a grammar. And it was actually a grammar by Lorenzo Gervasio Panduro, and it looked like that. And this is actually the best or the only available description of this language. We don't know of any relatives of this language. So basically, if we cannot read that, and if we do not get enough information from this kind of description, then we cannot know enough about this language. So the contribution of those linguists, early linguists, is actually extremely important. Okay, then in the 19th century, there was a new development, and basically the historical comparative method became very popular. So the important names here are the Shagal brothers and Wilhelm von Humboldt. So they basically were the fathers of Indo-European studies. And the important thing in Indo-European studies is that they were comparing related languages. And many people at that point thought that this is actually the only kind of comparison that is worthy at all. So to quote Antoine Meillet, historical linguistics is the only useful and valid linguistic classification. And so the development of typology, which is basically essentially comparing not necessarily related languages and finding some shared properties or some distinct properties. So this slowed down a little bit because the important thing was finding the proto-language and building the genealogical tree and things like that. Well, actually, from that time, we still get some very important observations that are still alive up to now. So the classification of languages into different morphological types, it goes back to the works of the Shagal brothers and von Humboldt. So isolating languages with very little morphology, like Chinese, for instance, then agglutinative languages with long words but morphemes, which each have specific meanings and that combine very neatly as bricks with one another. So agglutinative is the second type, then fusional, like many European languages, for instance, Spanish, where you also have morphemes, but one morpheme can express different things, like this multi-headed monster over here, which expresses a whole range of different linguistic categories, and then polysynthetic languages. So this is an observation that was made already in the 19th century, and is still a valid way to classify languages. There are some differences. You might be familiar with a slightly different list of morphological types, but the basic observation still holds. Well, if we are talking about linguistic typology as such, then of course it's a relevant question is when the term itself was coined. And here, the person who actually coined the term linguistic typology was Georg von den Gabelens. He was comparing linguists to biologists. So what he wrote is, what an achievement would it be were we able to confront a language and say to it, you have such and such a specific property, and hence also such and such further properties, and such an overall character. So this is actually, if you think of modern typology, this is very similar to what typologists do right now. So basically, this is classification of languages, and it's not about languages being related to each other or going back to a specific proto-language, but this is simply looking for shared features. So that was a very big step forward in terms of linguistic typology. And yeah, so this is a specific quote where he actually introduced the term. So he says, if one had to baptize a not yet born child, I would choose the name typology. So this is when the term was born. So again, a very important contribution is that he made it very clear that you can and should also compare unrelated languages and find shared features. So it's not about historical comparative linguistics, but about typology in the modern sense. Actually, this distinction was not clear to many researchers for some time afterwards. Then he emphasized the spiral development. So basically that languages, they do not change for better or for worse, for instance, but they simply change. And another important thing is that actually there was no evaluation whatsoever, because a very common view at the time was that some languages are good or perfect, often Indo-European, and some languages are primitive and not so perfect, often non-Indo-European languages. But actually, Georg von den Gabelens was not interested in evaluating languages, and this was again a very big step forward. Also something that is accepted in modern linguistic typology. Then in the first half of the 20th century, there were some further steps that developed linguistic typology. So for instance, one important name there is Edward Sapir. His important contribution is that he was the one to say that one language can make use of several different strategies. So basically, we don't need to just classify languages. So just put all the features of a language together and say, you belong to this type, and then you belong to a different type, and so on. But basically, different languages can combine various features. They can express different categories in different ways. So the classification of languages into morphological types as just agglutinative or polysynthetic, for instance, is too simplistic, but it's actually much more complicated than that. So what he said was important is the nature of the concepts expressed by the language. So different grammatical categories, how they work in languages. And this is again something that we can later see in typological investigations. Then another important figure was Roman Jakobson. He actually was the one who saw some parallels in the development of children's speech, in the loss of speech in different people suffering from aphasia. So for instance, he saw that child acquires fricatives after stops. So they first start saying things like p and b, and only later they develop f and v, and aphasics lose stops after losing fricatives, so it's in the opposite direction. And on the other hand, from a typological perspective, in terms of global diversity, there exists no language which has fricatives without having stops. So if languages have sounds like f and v, that means that p and b, for instance, will also be there. So this is just simplifying that. And what he suggested is that typology actually discloses laws of implication, which underlie the phonological and apparently the morphological structure of languages. So he introduced this idea that we can formulate generalizations about languages in general of the type, if there is something, then there is something else. And this actually influenced linguistic typology dramatically, because one person who specifically credited Jakobson for this observation and for this idea was Joseph Greenberg. Probably if you have ever taken a course like an introduction to linguistic typology or something, or even in an introduction into general linguistics, you probably have heard of Greenberg as the founding father of modern linguistic typology. So the most well-known contribution is a set of implicational typological universals that he introduced in his work from 1963. So that was a long list of statements of the kind if, then. A lot of them, or maybe the best known of them, pertain to word order. So for instance, here we have a universal number 4 with overwhelmingly greater than chance frequency. Languages with normal SOV order are postpositional. So basically, if the order of main elements in the clause is subject, then object and verb. So if verb is in the end of the clause, then the language will also have postpositions rather than prepositions. So also, well, I'm having this number here for a reason, because Greenberg's universal are usually actually known and referred to by their numbers. So this is number 4. And an important thing about his work is actually that he had a language sample, so a sample of 30 languages. Well, you can see that, well, quite a lot of languages came from Eurasia, so lots of European languages and Asian languages, but still also some languages from Africa, some languages, well, a couple of languages from Oceania, and some languages from the Americas. Of course, it's not perfectly balanced, but still it was a sample of languages. So most of the work before him was based on impressionistic observations. Of course, many of those early researchers knew a lot about different languages, but nevertheless, there was no proper sample. So this was very important about Greenberg's work. And well, the types of universals that we actually might that we can formulate in general. So this is a classification. This specific table comes from a paper by Evans and Levinson from 2009, where they discuss universals and how universal they actually are. But this is still based on Greenberg's work. So, well, there are 2 types of universals, basically the ones that are exceptionless. For instance, all languages have property X, or if a language has property X, it also has property Y. But some, well, other universals that we might also formulate, well, they are statistical universals or universal tendencies. So the ones on the right are of the type most languages have property X, or if a language has property X, it will tend to have property Y. And it turns out that if we, well, the more languages we take, the harder it is to find absolute universals, which are, on the other hand, interesting at all. So there are hardly any features that are shared by all the human languages, and yet they are not kind of definitional to the human language as such. So in that sense, those statistical universals, they turned out to be much more interesting and much more important in the development of linguistic typology. Because even if they are not absolute universals, absolute rules that cannot be broken by any language whatsoever, nevertheless, they are stable solutions that languages tend to prefer and somehow stick to this stage when they have reached it, and so on. So this is why those universal actually gained more attention in the development of linguistic typology. And well, those universals, of course, they can be formulated in the way Greenberg did it, as just simple statements, if then. But there are some improvements. So to say, for instance, if you combine several universals, several statements, then you can actually build a hierarchy, which shows a hierarchy of certain features or certain properties of languages. And it's easier to grasp the tendency that we actually observe. So the example that we have here is the implicational hierarchy for expressing number in the world's languages. It pertains actually to structural coding, so how the category of number is coded, and behavioral potential, like what are some implications of the use of number in different contexts. And the hierarchy looks like that. So singular is the least marked number, then plural is more marked, dual is even more marked, and then trial or paucal, so something that comes in a set of 3 or a small number. It differs from language to language, but maybe 3 to 7. This is the most marked. And there are various ways in which it manifests itself. So for instance, in Manam, a language spoken in Papua New Guinea, you can see that if you just say that woman, then basically the third person singular marker is 0. So singular is unmarked in this language. Then if you want to say those women, then you need a plural marker. So this is what you get over here in the second example, but it's just one single affix. And then if you want to express dual number or paucal number, so small number, then you need to, in addition to the plural marker that you already had in the plural, you need some connective vowel and also a specific dual or paucal marker. So this shows that singular in terms of the number of morphemes used is the least marked, and then comes plural, and then come other numbers. Also, if you think of different European languages, you will see that the universal number 37 by Greenberg holds that a language never has more gender categories in non-singular numbers than in the singular. So in many European languages, like for instance, in Russian or in French, you get differentiation in not in gender in the, well, in some cases at least, in singular, but not in the plural. Okay, so that's another way to put some universals together that has become quite popular. And maybe you know of some other implicational hierarchies, but we're not going to discuss them. Then yet another option how you can formulate generalizations and put them together to build something bigger are implicational maps. They are also known as semantic maps, even though this term is sometimes criticized because it's not always about semantics. It's not always about meaning. Probably the best known example is an implicational map by Martin Haspelmath dealing with indefinite pronouns. So the map itself is over here, and it consists of various meanings or contexts in which indefinite pronouns can in principle appear. So for instance, direct negation or indirect negation or question, and so on. And they are organized in a way, it is actually based on a sample of 40 languages that if you take indefinite pronouns and other similar units in different languages, and you try to see in which context this specific item can be used, then all the contexts in which it can be used will always be adjacent on the map. So if we take a look at English here, for instance, then some can be used in the context where something is specific known, specific unknown, and so on, and up to, for instance, questions. So have you seen some people here? So you can use it in a question, but here it overlaps with any. So have you seen any people there? And so on. And for every single item, you can actually find a part of this map for which it works. And if it stops working at some point, then it will not work in the other parts of the map. Well, of course, that might be if you're not familiar with this concept. If you see an implication map for the first time, it might be a little bit hard to grasp, but I hope at least the general idea is clear. But I definitely recommend looking into specific examples of specific languages, so maybe finding your mother tongue there to see how it works, and then it might become clearer. But generally, so this is another way to formulate generalizations. You can find, you can actually express that same idea with many, many separate statements, but you can also do that in a more elegant way with a map. But actually, well, when we talked about universals, we mentioned that they are usually formulated in the way like all languages have property X, or even most languages have property X. But an important question here is how many languages is actually all, or how many languages is most? So we have already seen that in Greenberg's study, there were 30 languages. In Haspelmath's study, the one that I showed earlier, there were 40 languages that he considered in more detail and 100 languages that he considered more superficially. But is that enough? Is it not? And the question is basically, how close can we get to the overall linguistic diversity? Can we actually make claims about all languages, or even about most languages? And here I have another poll for you. Just a second. Yes, so I will launch it now. It concerns the number of languages of the world. Maybe you know answers to some of them. To some of them, you might have to guess, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, well, I have most answers anyway, so I'll just end the poll now. And let's take a look at the results. So these are your answers. So how many languages are currently used in the world? And most of you think that it's around 7,500. Then how many languages have ever been used in the world in total? So since the beginning of the human language. And most of you seem to think that it's around 50,000. And then for what share of currently used languages are there relatively long descriptions, so over 300 pages. And most of you are quite pessimistic here, so you say it's around 25%. So let's take a look at what we actually know about this. Yeah, well, so how many languages are there? A very good source of information for that is Glottolog. If you're not familiar with the resource, I can only recommend it. So it lists 8,604 languages. Some of them are extinct. So actually the estimate is that now around 7,500 languages are used in the world. Please note that I'm using the word used, so there's not only spoken languages, but actually also sign languages. They are quite often overlooked in linguistic typology, and well, we are not going to talk a lot about them in this course either, but actually this is still something important to keep in mind. As for the estimate about the overall number of languages, I have seen different, but at least one is the one that assumes that a language stays the same for maximally about 1,000 years. Then it changes enough for us to claim that that's already a different language. Then on average, there have been at least 5,000 languages in the world at a given moment. And human language emerged at least 100,000 years ago. Actually, these are all estimates, so it's not something that is set in stone. But if we assume these things, then there would have been at least 500,000 languages in the world. I've seen estimates where people say it's the number is smaller or larger, but nevertheless, it's around this number. And even if it's half that number, it's still a lot. And obviously, we cannot make any claims about the languages, all the languages that have ever been there. Besides, even if we take those 7,500 languages that are currently used in the world, not all of them are very well described. And you were correct here that actually, according to Glottolog, grammars with more than 300 pages exist for roughly quarter of all the languages in the world. There is a very nice resource, so that's a part of Glottolog. It's called Glottoscope, which actually shows the documentation status and endangerment status of different languages. So here, colors are for the endangerment status. So the redder, the more endangered languages are, and the greener, the safer. And then the shape here indicates the most extensive description. It's really hard to see anything when you consider the entire world, but if you're interested in a specific region, then you can just zoom in, and I encourage you to explore this resource because it's actually very helpful. But in any case, so lots of languages do not have good descriptions, and my experience in typological work is that even a grammar of 300 pages is hardly ever enough to get the information you need. So basically, we still, even about the languages that are still present, we know relatively little. So this is why linguists use samples in typological studies. This is what Greenberg did already in his pioneering work. So the general idea is if we cannot study all the languages, we need a representative sample. And there are different techniques, sampling techniques, as to how many languages we take from different regions, how many languages we take in general, and so on. But the most important thing that we need to keep in mind is avoiding biases. So basically, we cannot take languages that are too similar to each other. And if we want to avoid that, then the most important bias that we need to avoid is the genealogical one. So we should not take closely related languages and pretend that they are independent. So they are similar for obvious reasons. And areal bias is another one. So if we only take languages from one part of the world, then our sample is not really representative. A very common technique that is used in typological studies is stratifying the sample at the level of genus. So this unit, this level of classification is discussed is Matthew Dreyer's article from 1989. So it's a level of classification that is intended to be comparable in time depth across language families all around the world. So language families can be of different age or of different depth generally. So some of them are older, some of them are younger, so they are not directly comparable to one another. So genus is around 3.5, 4,000 years. So that means when the, or actually or less, but this is an approximate time depth of a genus. So in typological studies, you would take one language per genus, and this will be included in your sample. Then there is a very nice article by Matti Miestamo and his co-authors from 2016, where he shows how you can build a language sample of a certain size, like 50 languages or 100 languages or 600 languages, and you will need to take a specific number of genera from a linguistic area, from a geographical area, basically Africa or Eurasia or North America, depending on the overall diversity. So for instance, if in general in Australia and New Guinea, there are lots of genera, that means that in any language sample, in sample of any size, you need to have lots of Australian and New Guinean languages. So in a sample of 50 languages, for instance, you will have 13 from this region. In a sample of 400 languages, you will have 108 from this area. So this is very convenient, and it's supposed to be relatively representative. Again, there are other techniques, but I'm not going to cover them right now. So this is just a general idea of how one might approach this. And actually, using those samples, lots of studies have been done. Here are some, and usually, as you see, well, this is what Georg von Gabelen said, we need to have need to look into specific features rather than languages in general. So many of those typological studies, they deal with specific features. Here are some very well-known ones and some less known ones, but I couldn't resist including my own study. But generally, they all are very similar in the sense that linguists take a sample of languages and they study a specific phenomenon in all these languages. Of course, these studies are available as books, but many of them are actually available in a different format. And many of them actually became the basis for the World Atlas of Language Structures. That's a very important typological database, which is available online. So it's walls.info, so you can explore this if you're not familiar with it yet. So it is a database that shows different properties across languages, and it has great maps. So for instance, there is this book called Gender by Greville Corbett, and there is a corresponding chapter and a map in the World Atlas of Language Structures. So this map actually shows the number of genders or noun classes in different languages. So the white dot, which corresponds, each dot corresponds to a language. One dot is, white dot is language with no gender distinctions. The yellow one is with 2, then orange 3, red 4, and black 5 or more, sorry. So you get a general geographical distribution of languages according to the number of genders. Of course, the study is much more than that, but this is just a very nice visualization of linguistic diversity in this respect. And WALS, so the World Atlas of Language Structures, or WALS, has a number of features. Many of them are grammatical, morphological, or syntactic, for instance. Some belong to other domains, for instance, phonology. So one feature that is considered there is tone. So languages that make use of tone and tonal contrasts in their grammar. So white dots, again, no tone, and then languages with simple tone systems are pink, and the red ones are the ones with complex tone systems. And again, you can see that the geographical distribution is not random. So there are areas where there are lots of languages with tonal systems, like Southeast Asia, for instance, or most of the African languages that we see here are actually tonal, with either complex tone systems or simple tone systems. So this is a very nice visual representation. And you can also see the number of languages involved. So for the number of genders, it's 2,500. Then for tone, it's a little bit over 500. The largest samples that are available in WALS are for word order chapters. So these are by Matthew Dreyer. So the order of object and verb. So this is the largest sample that you have in WALS. So around 1,500 languages. So yeah, again, OV word order, so where the verb is in the final position in the clause, and VO, where the verb is in the middle position. Again, you can see that the distribution is not random. Importantly, those maps are very good in the sense that they allow us to visualize some of the earlier statements, like Greenberg's universals. For instance, another feature dealing with word order is the feature 85 and map 85A, order of adposition and noun phrase. So this is basically blue dots here are postpositions, red dots here are prepositions. And as we might still remember, Greenberg actually claimed that if a language has OV word order, then it's likely that it has postpositions. And if we just compare these maps to one another, this is very simple, and it has lots of languages here. We can see that, well, now I'm just changing them back and forth. We can see that, of course, they do not exactly match, but actually the correlation, even the way we can see it with our eyes, is quite significant. So this is a nice way to visualize some of the statements and confirm them on a larger sample. So it's not 30 languages like Greenberg had, but actually many, many more. Of course, an important question when we are doing linguistic typology is the sources of our data. And probably the most important source of data for typological studies are grammars. So obviously typologists do not speak all these languages, but they need to use some descriptions by other specialists. And what you get actually are very diverse grammars and sketches. So you might still remember the story of Lula grammar that I tried to work with and was not entirely successful. So generally, you just take what you can get. Of course, what you want are actually typologically oriented grammars. Importantly, this means that they follow some established conventions. For instance, the Leipzig glossing rules. So this is the rule, the set of rules for interlinear glossing. So where interlinear notation, where you do not just provide the example in the language you describe and the translation, but you also actually show some grammatical information as to how the words are organized and how they work, what morphemes are involved. So this is a very good example, a relatively recent grammar of one of the Quechua languages. So you can see that, and you can guess how actually you cannot just analyze all those long words without any morphological additional information. So following such conventions is, of course, very important. In addition to grammars, another source of data for typological studies are questionnaires. So this is the situation where you are not looking for specific information in available descriptions, but rather you work with researchers or speakers to collect exactly the information that you need for your study. And they are very different. There are at least two very helpful links here. So one is to ToolQuest, a database of questionnaires where researchers can deposit their questionnaires. So it has a very nice collection for different typological features. And then another set created at the Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig some time ago. So some of these questionnaires, they target researchers. So they ask theoretical questions, basically, about something. So this one is a sample from an excerpt from a questionnaire on ditransitive constructions. The main author here is Andrei Malchukov. So like, how is a certain participant flagged? How is it expressed in a language? So this targets researchers. There are also questionnaires that target native speakers. So actually you can just work with a native speaker or a speaker of a certain language and ask them to translate different sentences in a certain context, and then you can analyze those sentences. And if you collect enough data from lots of different languages, you actually get comparable data that you can analyze and see what common patterns you can find. So this second example is from a questionnaire by Östendahl on tense, aspect, and modality, so verbal categories. Of course, well, this is something that is relatively new. Another source of data for typological studies are language corpora. And of course, it's much harder to work with corpora because it's hard to work with a language that you are not really familiar with. But nevertheless, they allow to study some features that cannot be seen by grammars. For instance, you can investigate various probabilistic and gradient properties of languages. So the word order is not always the same, but it can be relatively less or more common in a certain language, and you can only see that in a corpus. Or you can discover and interpret some cross-linguistic generalizations based on processing and communicative mechanisms. This is, again, something that you can only see in a corpus. The earlier corpora that were used in typological studies were Bible translations. Now there is a huge initiative, a huge project called Universal Dependencies, where they have very rich annotation for corpora for different languages. So actually, even without knowing the language, you can work with it relatively nicely. But the problem is that the availability of languages differs. So for instance, for some larger languages like Arabic in this project, the corpus is relatively large. But for Abaza, Caucasian language, you only have around 1,000 words, which is like less than 100 sentences. So this means that you cannot really make any generalizations. But this is a rapidly developing field. Finally, there are also databases that are another important source of information. And now the number of those databases is growing, largely thanks to the project which is called Cross-Linguistic Linked Data, a project that is actually it creates a platform for different databases, including WALS. So here, this is just a small part of the list of databases that use this standard and the format that they offer. So actually, sometimes you can work not with primary data or description, but already with data sets that were compiled by other linguists. And this is another way to approach typological data. A recent development, a recent database, which is also based on this standard, is GramBank, which was launched last year. So it basically is similar to WALS in some ways, but different in others. It has a much larger sample of languages, but the features there are usually binary. So, well, instead of the classification of languages into those that have postpositions predominantly or prepositions, they simply have features of the type, are there prepositions? And then one is yes, so yellow is yes, and zero or green here is no. And then there is another feature if there are postpositions or not. So basically they are independent from each other, and some languages have both. And so it's not directly comparable to what you get in WALS, but the coverage in terms of languages is much, much wider. So, and there are more databases becoming available. So we can keep an eye on that. Yeah, actually here I had just another short poll for you. I wanted to ask you about the databases that you are familiar with. So I will launch it now, and you can choose several just for me to understand how much of these things you already know. So please tick the databases that you are familiar with, or maybe that you have used already. Okay, I guess we have most of the answers already, so I will just stop the poll here. Yes, and I can share the results with you. So, okay, well, we can see that quite a lot of you are familiar with WALS, and then Ethnologue comes second, I guess. This is an important database of metalinguistic information. The problem with Ethnologue is that it is now behind the paywall, so this is why it's not the best option for everyone, but nevertheless, still a very widely known database. Okay, well, we'll still take a look at some of these databases later during the course. Some of them maybe not, but thanks, that was very helpful for me. Okay, so basically that's all I wanted to say today. And the only question that we still have left is what is next. So next we're going to have a lecture on Wednesday, again with me. So it's going to be on explanations in linguistic typology. So obviously, if we already have data and we have generalizations, the next reasonable question is what to do with it and why are the languages the way they are. So the task that I have for you now is, as I said, to submit 3 very short take-home messages from the session that you personally find most important. Maybe I told you about a very important typological database or a sampling technique. So I expect that by tomorrow, 7:30 in the evening, Central European summertime. And again, that's obligatory for active participants, but everyone is very welcome to contribute. And then we'll meet on Wednesday from 1:45 6. So basically, you are free to come a little bit early. And actually, I would ask you to come a little bit early if you can, so that we can vote for the take-home messages and still recap what we have learned today. And actually, finally, I have just one very brief poll for you, just to understand how well this is going so far. That's just some very quick instant feedback for me. So how much have you learned in this session, and how easy was it to follow the lecture? Since the audience here is extremely diverse, then it would be interesting for me to see. That's anonymous, so I'm not going to see who is answering, so feel free to be honest here. Okay, while you're answering, there is a question in the chat, a practical one. If you need a username and password to submit the take-home messages, no, that's basically just a link. And again, I will just send this link to everyone. And you can just click on it, and it's just another form as the one that you filled in during your registration. Yeah, so you don't need anything. You just need to fill in the form and submit, and this is it. Okay, yeah, thanks. So I'm ending this poll now. Thank you very much. That's helpful. I'm not going to share the results, but it seems like people have learned some new things, which is the most important outcome. Yes, I will share the recorded session. It will be available on the website, and I will just send all the information once again to all the registered participants, so that you could have access to that. So it takes some time to process the session, but I think that I will make it available already tonight. Okay, then there was another question about the dot, yeah, whether it represents English or a different language. It's that, well, this is I will not answer this specific question, just not to take too much time, but a general thing about databases is that they are not always entirely accurate for various reasons. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. The other thing is that some of the analysis that you find in typological databases might not be quite in line with what you're used to for various reasons. And usually just the researchers, they have their own explanation of what they had in mind there. So this is why it might be not quite intuitive. But I guess you could just take a look at this specific point if you're interested in it. Okay, well, so then I guess if there are no further questions, then see you on Wednesday, and thank you for coming today.